No, we are not institutionally biased. Oh, no, not me. I'm definitely biased. Maybe not institutionally, but definitely biased, because all of my biases are not unconscious, very, very, very conscious, because they're based on facts as I know them, as I understand them. And when new facts come in, I change my view, whether it's on things like lockdown or climate change or anything, Brexit, anything like that. I do change my views based on the facts, but it's difficult to know what the facts are, because you'd think that having a trusted broadcaster paid for by the state under penalty of going to prison if you don't pay the fine, if you don't pay for your licence fee, you'd think that the BBC would be a place we could get the facts, and yet we can't. And yet the BBC is now facing its worst crisis more than a decade after both the Director General, Tim Davie, and its Head of News, Deborah Turness, quit last night over revelations about bias at the broadcast. Well, they've been picked up by Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader. He's been given a speech today at press conference about reform being the party of small business, and governments only listen to big business, which is certainly the case. CBI gets far more say than, to say, the Federation of Small Businesses, even though they represent far more people, not just businesses, but also far more employees. But Nigel Farage was asked about his reaction to Donald Trump's response to the BBC story, where, let's face it, quite a lot of glee from Donald Trump. He posted on Truth Social saying that to slam Tim Davie, saying that top people at the BBC are all quitting or fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, perfect speech of January the 6th. Well, that's the specific last straw that caused those departures, but we've had an awful lot of problems over the last 5 years, non-stop, I would say, this year, certainly in terms of coverage of Gaza and over other issues as well. But Nigel Farage, when asked for his reaction to the story, and particularly Donald Trump's response, he said, if I was the President of the United States of America and I'd been stitched up on the eve of a national election, and he says, look, what the BBC did was election interference. He said quite clearly he believes the BBC has been biased for decades. He says the BBC has been institutionally biased for decades, and he said coverage of issues like Europe, migration, net zero, the climate and Gaza, and the coverage of Trump had been biased as well. And he said he spoke to the President on Friday, and he just said to me, is this how you treat your best ally? Quite a powerful comment, he says. We're going to be talking about all of that. We're going to talk to Tom Tugendhat, the Conservative MP and former Security Minister, in a few moments. Also, in the next half hour, we're going to talk to a former BBC executive, Danny Cohen. He's now a columnist at The Telegraph, which, of course, broke the big story, this internal report that basically no action was taken on whatsoever until, of course, it went to the front page of The Telegraph. But let me bring in Benedict Spence, he's a Conservative commentator, joining us throughout the show. Benedict, and his Movember tash, which I like to say is rather impressive. It doesn't at all, as I say, look like a 70s porn star or a member of a Mexican drug cartel, as we have often said on many a November before. Don't roll your eyes, you know that's the stuff you come in for.
This moustache is what gives me the impartiality. You know that this comes with
It is the giver of impartiality.
Absolutely.
What do you reckon of what Nigel Farage has had to say? That the BBC, that it was blatant, it was election interference, and that the BBC is institutionally biased.
Oh, OK. Election interference, I possibly wouldn't go that far. I understand that Nigel Farage is going to try and make hay out of this. He's good friends with Donald Trump, actually. You know, we need to remember that, and that he's always going to use this as an opportunity to bolster and also take a pot shot. Institutionally biased, I think there's more and more evidence of that sort of thing, certainly on Donald Trump, because I think it's been easy to be institutionally biased against Donald Trump, because he's not really our problem. He sort of is, but sort of isn't.
Would that have influenced, would what the BBC have written influence the American election
at all? I doubt it. Put it this way. I doubt the average Republican voter cares two hoots what the BBC or anybody in the UK, frankly, has to say. I think they're very sort of focused, single-minded on what sort of news sources they listen to. So I doubt you can say it's election interference. But bias, yes. I think very clearly there is bias. Certainly there was a lot of bias against Donald Trump because it was cheap and it was easy to do and you could get a laugh out of it, and a lot of people in the corporation thought that he was a fascist and ghastly and all that sort of thing. Elsewhere, I also think on things like the trans issue and Gaza to a certain extent as well, we have begun to see what you could say is certainly a pattern of behaviour that you could put down as, yeah, there's something not quite right there, is there? So that's on three things that I think that's too much to just go, oh, that's a coincidence.
These aren't one-offs. And again, the fact that the people who resigned are talking about this mistake, in inverted commas, about the documentary, the Panorama documentary about the US election, went out just before the election, November 2024. But it included uploaded this footage from January the 6th, 2021, this speech that Donald Trump made. It's not a mistake when you splice together two comments as if they were made seamlessly together when they are 54 minutes apart. You don't it's not possible to accidentally do that. And the fact that no one noticed it, and then months later there was a report into it, and then nothing was done and no one did anything. And as far as we're aware, there's been no action and no, I mean, frankly, no heads have rolled. And now it's the senior people for their failure. Well, let's face it, they've covered it up. That's what they've done. It's always the cover-up that does it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. You can get in touch at TalkTV. Calls are charged the national rate. Text costs £1. Standard network rate message. We're going to get to more of your calls coming in thick and fast, I promise you, in the next 50 minutes or so. Let's talk now to Tom Tugendhat. He's a Conservative MP. He's also a former Security Minister and joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Tom.
Julia, how are you? I feel I'm missing the start. I'm so sorry. I'm not taking drugs for a cartel.
Don't worry.
Well, what are you doing?
I'm sure I could give you a run for your money, but there we are. Look, let's go straight to the heart of the matter. Do you agree with Nigel Farage that this was election interference and that the BBC has been institutionally biased for decades?
Look, what I think it is I think it's extremely poor editorial judgment. I think it's extremely demonstrative of one view of diversity, which is only in identity, not in thought. And it's very sadly demonstrating an institution that has got high on its own supply, if you like, and has, to continue the drugs metaphor, and has forgotten that actually what it should be doing is representing the whole of the United Kingdom and therefore being entirely factual. I mean, frankly, there are quite a lot of bits of this story that the Telegraph has, let's be honest, done us all a huge favour in reporting. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, the most egregious is the Donald Trump one. Not because it would have affected the election. It came out a long time after the election. And so, the idea that it would have had any significant effect in the United States, I don't think is credible. But because it is just flagrantly dishonest. It's just not true. And if you're setting up organisations like BBC Verify, or if you're claiming that the role of the BBC is to be a sort of nation shall speak peace unto nation, which is their motto, then you have to be honest. And I'm afraid the BBC quite clearly was not honest.
Well, this is you talk about a poor editorial judgment. Can you excuse putting Bob Villain, carry him the singer shouting, death to the IDF and effing anti-Semite, and effing anti-Semite, not anti-Semites, effing whichever he was talking about at the time. Putting that and leaving that on the live feed for hours and hours on end. Is it poor editorial judgment to pay the son of a Hamas official to front a document? Is it poor editorial judgment to not interview J.K. Rowling because of her apparently problematic views on knowing basic biology about men and women? Is it poor editorial judgment, any of that? Because it seemed, and even to splice together those two bits of excerpts from Donald Trump's speech, those are deliberate acts of, I would say, sort of sabotage of the truth.
Right. So sorry, forgive me. Let me be clear what I meant by poor editorial judgment. I didn't mean that those were. I meant that the overall editors of the BBC are clearly, were, let's see who's in charge now, were clearly not keeping a proper judgment over who made up their teams. Within the teams, then there was some frank dishonesty, right? So, I mentioned the Donald Trump thing, which I think is, I don't see how you defend it other than as simple dishonesty. I'm afraid I did.
With a political purpose.
I suspect actually worse than that. I don't think it was for a political purpose. I think they thought they were telling the truth. I think they, from their own perspective, think that they were revealing the real truth, if you see what I mean. Now, actually, that doesn't make it better. Actually, it makes it worse because it suggests that they didn't even realise that they were, being so quite free.
But do you think that's the same thing? And I suspect you may be right about this. And it's a point and a story I told a couple of hours ago on the show, a conversation I had with Tim Davie, Director General of the BBC, as was, in the summer, where I talked to him about institutional anti-Semitism at the BBC, and he was outraged by this, got really quite agitated with me. And then even though I'd said to him categorically, I don't believe that you're anti-Semitic, or that most senior people at the BBC or the staff are, I know a lot of people who work there, being old colleagues of mine over the years, are anti-Semitic, but the institutional anti-Semitism is so ingrained, they almost don't see it. They don't even know they're doing it, in the same way the bias, over Brexit and immigration and climate change. They literally don't even know it's happening. They are in a bubble that is so distinct from, mainstream opinion in this country. They don't even know they're doing it. But he then said, you're accusing me of being an anti-Semite. He tried to turn it into me making a personal accusation. But that's the thing. The reason why they're going, but I know I'm not. I know that I believe in facts. They genuinely think they're the good people.
I'm afraid you're closer to the truth there, Julia. It's not a lie in the sense that they see the truth and they choose to, tell something that they know to be untrue. It's that they think they're reinforcing what is true. And it's interesting, actually, just before, you were talking about the, I can't remember the name of the person who sang Death of the IDF in Glastonbury, which is particularly horrific, but the kneecap performance at Glastonbury was coming up. And I got in touch with a senior person at the BBC when I heard that it was going to happen and said, look, you must be prepared that you may be about to be in breach of the Terrorism Act because you may be about to broadcast some pro-Hamas propaganda, or some pro-Hezbollah propaganda. So can you just assure me that you've thought this through and that, should this happen, you're ready to pull the plug or respond in a correct way? And I got a pretty sort of vacuous response saying, of course, it's up to Glastonbury who they invite, but it is, of course, up to us who we broadcast. And I said, yeah, well, yes, it is. And you are responsible for what you broadcast. And if you broadcast, material that's in breach of the Terrorism Act, then you're complicit in it, right? You've
been warned.
It's
you've not like warned. Out of the blue, Kylie Minogue spouted these views.
No, exactly. This is somebody who had, for various reasons, the trial got dropped, but who had actually been charged by the police with the breach of the Terrorism Act, right? And I got a very vacuous response back. And so I'm forgive me, my sympathy is not really with the BBC on this one, because it's not like you ain't been warned many, many, many times that this is a serious problem.
Does it matter? Does any of this matter?
Yes,
because again, we've got this is the front page of every newspaper. It is, at the moment, it's been, as far as I gather, for most of the last week. It's leading, every news, virtually all we've talked about today. The BBC are talking about it, and we know the BBC likes talking about itself anyway. Always thinks it's the news story, but doesn't like it when it's critical of it. But does it really matter what this one media organisation does?
Yes. Of course it does, Julia, and it matters for exactly the reason that you can see that the President of the United States has raised it. And because the reality is, whatever you or I or anybody else watching this show thinks of the BBC, the reality is a lot of people around the world have heard of it. What it says carries weight. People repeat it in various different ways. True or false, the repetition matters, right? And it just is true that the more noise you make about something, eventually people will start to believe it. That's how propaganda works, right? You repeat things often enough, and eventually enough people will believe it that it will have some effect. Will it change everybody's mind? Will it swing an election? Will it cause a genocide or a war, or will it end a genocide or a war? Maybe not, but it will persuade some people. So yes, it does matter, and it particularly matters because you and I are also forced to pay for it.
Yeah.
Now, not just in the sense that we have to pay the license fee, which is one thing, but also in that the BBC World Service, which I happen to believe should be a force for good in this world, has been broadcasting Muslim Brotherhood propaganda for the best part of 5-10 years. I have warned the BBC World Service about it when I was chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee. I know that other friendly Arab states have warned the BBC about this over many years. And, it is simply not acceptable that we do not have proper editorial oversight over some of these languages.
And some of the people on BBC Arabic, the BBC Arabic, the BBC English channel, publishing very different things to the BBC Arabic channel, but some of the people they're using, in fact, on both channels, but particularly BBC Arabic, people who have blatantly, openly on social media, in interviews, not just taking the Palestinian side, but absolutely rejoicing in the massacre on October the 7th, supporting Hamas. Such blatant stuff. These people, utterly not credible as journalistic sources, and yet being used again and again and again and again.
So I completely agree with you, and that's the most egregious. But actually, I think, if I may, the more dangerous is the subtle, where you see the same pictures broadcast on BBC World Service English, BBC World Service Arabic, exactly the same pictures. And so the editor, who doesn't speak Arabic, watches the same pictures, sees the same footage, and thinks it's the same story. Actually, the voiceover is completely different. The voiceover is totally different, with the BBC Arabic saying one thing and the BBC UK version different. Now, I mean, as you know, I speak Arabic, not so well anymore, but I can still understand what's going on. And it's really striking that I've raised this, many times in the past with BBC, and, it carries on.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, let's move on and talk from the BBC to the amazing men and women who made this conversation possible, because we live in a free country. We're not ruled by the Nazis, and there's incredible, particularly the men who died, who gave their lives at the ceremony yesterday and Remembrance Sunday. And this extraordinary interview that one of the D-Day heroes has given, he's a proud record as the country's oldest poppy seller. This is Alec Penston. And he has said that the sacrifice of the lost men of his generation wasn't worse what the country has become, and says the UK has gone to rack and ruin. As an ex-military man yourself, what do you make of his comments?
So, forgive me, I lost friends in Iraq and Afghanistan, and very sadly I've lost friends since then, people who never quite recovered in different ways. And I don't think it's really odd, because I don't think their sacrifice was worth it, right? I mean, I'd give anything to have them back. That's not what I mean by worth it. But do I think the alternative to having fought in France and Germany, or having defended Britain's interests around the world in the last 20 years that I was soldiering? No, I think the alternative is worse. The alternative of speaking German or being ruled by the Nazis, or, seeing terrorism flourish in Afghanistan, I think that's worse. Do I think it's worth it that we've lost our friend? No. The word worth doesn't really work for me, if you see what I mean. It's not. Mm-hmm. It's not a question of being worth it. And I understand. Look, I mean, of course, I can't understand in the same way. I didn't lose as many friends as he did, and I didn't serve in Normandy and all the rest of it. So I'm not. Don't get me wrong, I'm not making an equivalence on that basis. But do I think, am I grateful they fought? Yeah, God, I am, yes. Absolutely. 1,000 times I'm grateful. Because I understand why he doesn't think it's worth it. I really do. And if you want to, you and I, Julia, we've agreed on far too many things already this morning. But, do I think that things are going awry in various different ways? Of course I do. But do I think the alternative of being ruled by Nazis is just horrific? Yeah, it's absolutely horrific. I'm eternally grateful for the extraordinary courage and sacrifice of those people.
I think we all say amen to that. We'll leave it there. I so appreciate you joining us. So Tom Tugendhat, Conservative MP, former military man, of course, and former security minister.